All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Sexual Revolution Omni Crisis. Why Rational Men Quit, written by Connie Riker. Available now, links in description. Abortion Liberation. The practical anatomy of a modern delusion. A woman once asked me over a perfectly good steak dinner she hadn't paid for, what I would do if I lost my job tomorrow. She leaned back with that particular expression, half concern, half audit, like a tax assessor pretending to be a friend. I set down my fork and studied her face the way a plumber studies a pipe that's about to burst, not with anger, but with professional interest in the underlying pressure. I'd rebuild, I said. The better question is, what would you do? The silence that followed was architectural. You could build a cathedral in it. She had no answer, because the question was never about my preparedness. It was about her exit strategy. She was stress testing the lifeboat while standing safely on deck, eating my steak. Here is what they don't tell you. The system is mathematically engineered to make your worth zero. If a man's values reduce to his economic output, and modern romance has performed this reduction with surgical efficiency, and his economic output is subject to confiscatory taxation to fund bureaucracies that discriminate against him, family courts that dispossess him, and welfare systems that substitute for him, then the equation has only one solution. You are not a partner. You are a line item, and line items get cut. The Marxist left loves to wail about the alienation of labor, the idea that capitalism separates a man from the fruits of his work. Pure projection. The true alienation happens in family court, where a man's literal sweat is converted into alimony and child support payments for children he may see every other weekend, if a judge is feeling generous. Marx wrote 4 volumes complaining about a fraction of what the average divorced father experiences before lunch. I have watched brilliant men, engineers who designed the architecture of the modern world, laid off to meet a diversity quota, then return home to a wife who looks at them the way a landlord looks at a tenant 3 months behind. No due process, no gratitude, no recognition that the entire infrastructure of her comfort was built by men exactly like him. The corporate feminist state has pulled off the most elegant con in human history. It convinced men to finance their own obsolescence, then shamed them for noticing. You pay taxes that fund the bureaucracy that writes the regulations that govern the HR department, that fires you to hit a quota that your tax dollars subsidized. If a medieval serf had tried to explain this arrangement to his lord, the lord would have said, "That's too cruel, even for me." So I am going to teach you how to answer the question. Not her question, my question. The one that actually matters. What would you do if you stopped believing your worth was a paycheck? Because the man who fears losing his job is a slave to the system, and the man who fears losing his woman is a slave to the mirror. The rational man fears neither. His hands built worlds. Worlds can be rebuilt. What cannot be rebuilt is a life spent on your knees before a culture that takes everything you have and calls you privileged for the privilege of being empty. The provision question and the logos of male worth. A man falls off a cell tower in West Virginia. Another is crushed by a boom truck in a Houston warehouse. A third is buried in a Michigan trench collapse. These are not headlines, they are Tuesday. Men account for over 90% of workplace fatalities in America, roughly 13 deaths every single day, year after year. The census of fatal occupational injuries confirms it annually, and nobody cares. The lights come on, the sewers drain, the copper gets mined, the freight gets hauled, and the bodies get buried quietly by the women in their lives, who statistically will be fine. The culture that produces a million-word dissertation on the wage gap cannot produce a single editorial on the corpse gap. Male disposability is not a theory, it is a ledger written in bone. The word provision descends from the Latin providere, to see ahead, to look into the distance. A provider is not merely a man with a paycheck. He is a man who perceives winter before the first frost, who reads the future like a map, who stockpiles, fortifies, and constructs logistical bulwarks against catastrophe. The masculine provision instinct is the reason your grandmother survived the Depression and your grandfather stormed a beach. To reduce this transcendent function to a biweekly direct deposit is a category error so grotesque it would make a medieval craftsman weep. Yet here we are. A man's foresight, his sleepless calculations, his willingness to absorb risk so others may sleep. These are invisible to the modern gynocentric eye. The family court system has perfected an extraction mechanism that would make a medieval tax farmer blush. A man works, his labor becomes wages. His wages become alimony and child support for children. He may see every other weekend. If a judge is feeling generous, if his ex-wife feels like complying with the order which she faces no consequences for violating. Over 70% of divorces are initiated by women. The phrase is always irreconcilable differences, which is a legal euphemism, meaning I am exercising my exit option and keeping your income stream. The system then converts a father into an ATM with visitation rights if he is lucky. The true alienation of labor is not Marx's factory floor. It is a man wiring child support payments for children he is legally forbidden to raise. Feminism's rhetorical architecture is a marvel of double engineering. The ideology instructs men to be vulnerable, to share feelings, to dismantle stoicism as toxic. The moment a man actually does this, expresses anxiety about job security, about provision, about the terrifying precarity of his position, his attractiveness plummets. Studies confirm it. Women report losing respect for male partners who display emotional vulnerability. The ideology demands the confession, then punishes the confession with revulsion. It is a perfect Kafka trap. The act of compliance proves the defect. You are commanded to be vulnerable. Your vulnerability is the evidence of your weakness. Your weakness is the justification for replacing you. The guild system of the Old West understood something we have forgotten. A man who masters a craft owns something no institution can seize. The apprentice ladder, years of submission, correction, repetition, and eventual mastery, produced men who carried sovereignty in their hands. A stonemason, a blacksmith, a carpenter, a navigator. These men were not human resources. Their competence was their passport. The modern corporate structure obliterates this. A man is hired, trained in compliance protocols, plugged into a system that can eject him at any moment to satisfy a diversity target, and he calls this a career. He owns nothing. His pension is a promise from an institution that hates him. His skill set is proprietary to an employer who will replace him with cheaper labor the moment the quarterly numbers dip. The rational man sees this machinery and refuses to be ground by it. He does not ask, what if I lose my job? He asks, what have I built that cannot be taken? He acquires skills that exist outside corporate taxonomy. He can weld, he can code, he can grow food, he can fix engines, he can trade, he can defend. He builds brotherhood networks of men who share competence and mutual aid. He saves capital outside the banking surveillance system. He becomes, in the old sense, sovereign, a man whose authority over his own life matches his responsibility for it. The feminist inversion demands he provide without authority. His answer is to withdraw both provision and presence from any system that refuses reciprocity. Ask the mirror question. The next time a woman asks what you would do if you lost your job, turn it. Ask, if I were paralyzed tomorrow, would you stay? Watch her eyes. The flinch, the pause, the darting calculation behind the practiced empathy. That is the truth. The sexual revolution was designed to obscure. She is not asking about your resilience. She is stress testing her branch swing trajectory. The rational man does not resent this. He simply sees it. And having seen it, he stops building his life around the approval of someone whose approval is conditional on his output. He builds instead around logos, the permanent, the true, the beautiful, the competent. He becomes a man who can walk into any ruin and rebuild from stone. That is the only provision worth making. But understand this. The moment you stop apologizing for your competence, the moment you build that fortress of stone and refuse to negotiate your soul for conditional approval, the regime strikes back, not with swords, with a diagnosis. I have watched it happen to the strongest men I know. They mastered their craft, disciplined their appetites, held their frame against every storm, and then a woman with a therapy vocabulary and a grudge whispered one word: narcissist. And the entire machinery of modern institutional life snapped to attention as though she had sounded a war horn. The competent man who asks for reciprocity is no longer merely inconvenient. He is clinically dangerous. And so, having cleared the ground of the utility trap, we must now face the accusation trap, the single most effective weapon ever devised for converting male strength into evidence of male sin. The inverted mirror, the pathologization of male agency, and the narcissist trap. A Salem resident, 1692, points a finger and wails, "Her spirit afflicts me." No physical trace, no wound, no witness. The judge nods, the gallows groan, and a woman dies by the power of a hunch. 3 centuries later, your partner tilts her head, narrows her eyes, and asks, "Have you thought you might be a narcissist?" Identical logic, no proof needed. The accuser's inner feeling becomes the sole evidence. The accused must disprove a verdict that twists to swallow every defense. The scaffold is now the group chat, the HR office, or the therapist's chair, but the noose remains. You made me feel small, so you are small. The specter wears a new name like toxic masculinity. Yet the engine, accusation as final judgment, stands still. Consider the etymology. Narcissism descends from the Greek narcissos, meaning numbness, sleep, stupor. The classical narcissist is not merely self-admiring. He is anesthetized to the world beyond his own reflection. Now apply this diagnosis to the woman who demands that the entire household orbit her emotional weather, who weaponizes tears at the first challenge, who rewrites yesterday's agreement to suit today's mood, who is genuinely numb here, the man who calmly says, "I will not negotiate while you are shouting," or the woman who cannot perceive his interior life as real unless it performs for her on command. The clinical irony is surgical. The person most likely to deploy the word narcissist as a weapon is the person most structurally incapable of perceiving another's subjectivity. She calls you cold because your thermostat still works while hers is wired to the moon. Here is how the trick works in practice. A man I know, steady earner, faithful husband, present father, asked his girlfriend why she was messaging his friend at midnight with heart emojis. Not a scream, not an accusation. A question. Within 90 seconds, she was weeping, then shouting, then diagnosing, "You're insecure, you're controlling." This is exactly what my therapist warned me about. You're a narcissist abuser. The original act, her perfidy, evaporated like ethanol on a hot plate. By morning, his reaction had become the incident. Friends were briefed, sisters were briefed, a narrative was constructed. He was the villain, she was the survivor. This is what I call projection inversion, the dark art of exporting your own shadow onto the nearest wall, then prosecuting the wall for casting it. Let us formalize this with the rigor the age demands. Premise 1, a clinical narcissist is one who demands endless emotional supply from others while accepting zero accountability for her own conduct. Premise 2, the modern relationship script demands a man provide limitless emotional, financial, and domestic labor while his own needs are dismissed as patriarchal entitlements. Conclusion. The woman who diagnoses her boyfriend as a narcissist for refusing this arrangement is describing herself with the precision of a mirror she cannot read. The syllogism is airtight. The accuser is the accused. The projection is the confession. This trick succeeds only because institutions have been captured to amplify it. A woman says, "He makes me feel unsafe at work." And a man's 2-decade career enters a tunnel of HR investigations, sensitivity training, and whispered reputational damage before a single fact is checked. The phrase lived experience functions as a papal bull, an infallible private revelation against which no empirical evidence may be filed. Male assertiveness in a Monday meeting becomes intimidation by Wednesday. Female distress, however theatrical, receives instant institutional gravity, a gamma bias so consistent you could set a watch by it. Her feelings generate policy, his suffering generates a suggestion to seek help. Between male workplace deaths, over 90% of all occupational fatalities, and male suicide rates, nearly 4 times female, the claim that men are the emotionally coddled sex requires a suspension of arithmetic. So total, it qualifies as a religious act. Beware, above all, the woman who loudly announces herself an empath. She is not absorbing your feelings. She is a gravitational singularity hunting for material. Every confidence you share becomes ammunition for the next accusation. Every vulnerability becomes exhibit A in her prosecution of your character. The self-proclaimed empath is the most dangerous diagnostician in the room, precisely because she has convinced herself that her emotional reactions constitute evidence, and the therapy-indoctrinated culture agrees with her. Meanwhile, genuine love, agape, the willing of the other's good under truth, requires saying things that sting. The father who tells his son he is wasting his potential is not toxic. The husband who sets a budget is not controlling. The man who refuses to apologize for existing is not a narcissist. In a civilization that has replaced logos with sentimentality, the man who speaks honestly will always be indicted by those who lie fluently. Never JADE, justify, argue, defend. Explain your existence to someone wielding a psychological label as a weapon. When she deploys the accusation, do not turn inward and search your soul. That introspective flinch is the trap. The feminist therapeutic dialectic has trained you since boyhood to apologize for occupying space, and the narcissist label is designed to activate that programming. You confess, she is validated, the frame locks. Instead, hold jurisdiction over your own mind, the principle of subsidiarity applied to the soul. No hostile party, armed with a pop psychology vocabulary and a grudge, gets to dictate your psychological reality. Meet the accusation with one question, repeated calmly until it breaks. What specific behavior? What timeline? Whose evidence besides your feelings? The label shatters on contact with empirical demand, because it was never medicine. It was always a weapon dressed in a lab coat. The label-wielding woman in your kitchen is a lone sniper. The institution that hands her a rifle, immunizes her from perjury, and names a tribunal to enforce her grievance is a standing army. And I want you to see exactly how this army operates, because the same projection inversion that flipped your boundary into abuse in the living room has been codified into the HR manual, the campus bias portal, and the Title IX's office, where audi altrum partem is treated as a patriarchal obstruction, and the anonymous denunciation is enshrined as sacred testimony. Consider what happened to a tenured professor at the University of California in 2014, whose career was suspended by a shadow. The bureaucratic inquisition, anonymous accusations, and the death of due process. In 2014, a tenured professor at the University of California received notice that a complaint had been filed against him through the university's anonymous bias reporting portal. His offense: teaching Ovid's Metamorphoses, including the myth of Philomela, a foundational text of Western literature that depicts sexual violence not as instruction but as horror. He was suspended, investigated, and publicly marked before a single piece of evidence was examined. No accuser stood before him. No name was attached to the charge. His decades of scholarship, his professional standing, his good name, all of it subjected to a process that is the punishment. The university called this protecting the vulnerable. A medieval canonist would have called it what it is: calumny without consequence. The word anonymous descends from the Greek an without and onyma, name. An accusation stripped of a name is not an act of courage. It is an arrow fired from behind a wall. The West understood this for 2 millennia. Audi ultram partem, here the other side, was not a procedural nicety. It was a recognition etched in law that human beings lie, that accusers carry motives, that power corrupts whoever wields it, and that truth only emerges under the friction of confrontation. Medieval canon law required the accuser to swear a calumnia oath. If the charge proved false, the accuser suffered the same penalty demanded of the accused. This made the false accusation a grave personal risk. Modern feminism dismantled this check entirely. The accuser now faces zero liability, the accused faces total ruin, and the bureaucracy calls this progress. Consider the syllogism now operating beneath every Title IX office and HR department in the Western world. Premise 1. Due process is a patriarchal construct designed to shield abusers. Premise 2. All men exist as potential abusers by virtue of biological sex. Conclusion, therefore, suspending due process for men constitutes justice rather than tyranny. This is not hyperbole. It is the explicit operational logic of the 2011 Dear Colleague letter, which lowered evidentiary standards for campus sexual misconduct to a preponderance of evidence and stripped the accused of the right to cross-examine his accuser. The result was a Kafka machine. A man's career and reputation could be terminated by a preponderance, 50.01%, of often uncontested, uncorroborated accusation, while the accuser returned to her dormitory with a counselor and a grade adjustment. Apply the common sense test. Ask a farmer, a soldier, or a builder whether a man's life's work should be destroyable by a whisper. They will look at you as though you have lost your mind because you would have. They know in their bones, in the accumulated survival wisdom of every generation before ours, that any system rewarding anonymous denunciation will be weaponized by the vindictive, the envious, and the sociopathic. Count the ledger of what this system has cost. The Duke lacrosse players lost a year of their lives to a fabricated rape accusation. The prosecutor was disbarred, yet the accuser faced no criminal charges. The University of Virginia fraternity, vandalized by Rolling Stone's fabricated gang rape narrative, lost its reputation on the basis of a story the magazine never fact-checked. The accuser in that case, zero legal consequence. Hundreds of men across corporate America and academia have been terminated, suspended, or quietly pushed out based on anonymous complaints that would not survive 5 minutes in a real court of law. Here is the inquiry, rarely posed, for its resolution would dismantle the entire ideological framework. If women are genuinely robust, autonomous, and equivalent to men in all significant respects, why must they rely on the state's full coercive machinery, anonymous reporting lines, federal Title IX mandates, HR tribunals that assume guilt to navigate a professional dialogue, a workplace dispute, or a poor romantic encounter? The Believe All Women creed was never about compassion. It was a cultural Marxist attack on the nature of evidence. It flipped the burden of proof, turning an allegation into a verdict and a defense into additional proof of guilt. Each step taken away from men's freedom was hidden within the rhetoric of protection. Protection from minor slights, protection from challenging viewpoints, protection from the very existence of unchecked male behavior. This obsession with security became the false deity where fair procedure was offered up as tribute. A society that exchanges justice for comfort will learn. Just as all societies before Ithers discovered, just as every prior civilization has, that it ends up with neither. The institutional body has now entered a kind of metabolic crisis. Starved of the oxygen of truth, of evidence, cross-examination, confrontation, and falsifiability, it has begun to consume its own substance. Anonymous accusation is the ketone byproduct of this breakdown. A toxic energy source the system runs on when the clean fuel of due process has been withdrawn. The bureaucracy does not serve justice. It metabolizes accusation to sustain its own expansion. Every anonymous portal, every Title IX contractor, every mandatory bias training session feeds on the destruction of male reputation. The rational man sees this metabolic disorder for what it is and refuses to feed it. He does not debate the inquisitors. He does not plead before a tribunal that has already declared his sex guilty. He records every interaction, documents every meeting, refuses to be alone with a female colleague, and treats every HR department as what it has become, a hostile intelligence apparatus operating against him by default. There is no compromise with a system that denies you the right to face your accuser. You do not reform a witch hunt by appealing to the witches. The rational man withdraws his labor, his trust, and his compliance from institutions that have made themselves his enemy. He builds his own fortress, his own skills, his own network, his own legal protections, his own brotherhood. He starves the mob of the one substance it cannot manufacture, the productive sweat of the men it seeks to destroy. When the builders refuse to build for a civilization that burns them for shadows, that civilization collapses, and it deserves to. And here is where the fortress principle meets the bedroom principle. The institutional siege I just described is merely the macro expression of a micro assault that happens every single evening. In every restaurant and living room and king-sized bed across the disintegrating West. The same ideological pathogen that reprogrammed your HR department into a gender tribunal reprogrammed your girlfriend's dating vocabulary into a weapon kit. The state does not need to send a commissar to your home to enforce female supremacy. It has already trained her to run the interrogation herself. The moment you begin building your fortress, your skills, your brotherhood, your legal firewalls, you will discover that the most insidious sieges come not from the campus diversity office, but from the woman lying beside you, running tests on the very walls you have erected, probing for cracks in the mortar. And the first probe, the oldest trick in the arsenal, comes disguised as a casual question about your emotional state. The siege of the male heart, jealousy, possessiveness, and the battle for eros. Every time a woman asks you, "Are you jealous?" she is not seeking information. She is running reconnaissance on your perimeter defenses. The word itself betrays her game. Jealousy descends from the Greek zelos, zeal, fervor, honorable ardor, and the late Latin zelosus, meaning fiercely protective. For 3,000 years of Western civilization, a man who felt no zeal toward guarding his wife's exclusivity was considered defective, not enlightened. A Roman paterfamilias who tolerated another man's advances on his household would have been driven from the forum as a coward. Now, the modern genocentric machine has reclassified righteous zeal as a psychiatric disorder and marketed passivity as confidence. I watched this play out at a dinner party last year. The wife spent the evening touching another man's forearm, locking eyes with him, laughing at jokes only he could hear. When the husband finally said something, her response was instant, surgical, "You're so insecure." She had run the play from a script written by Cosmopolitan magazine and ratified by every HR department in the Anglosphere. Understand what that test actually measures. A woman who provokes jealousy is collecting data for her dual mating strategy. Evolutionary psychology has documented the pattern exhaustively. Ovulatory cycle shifts in women produce measurable preference changes for masculine, dominant markers during peak fertility, while preference for provisioning, cooperative traits increases during other cycle phases. She flirts with a rival to extract 2 data points simultaneously. Is her primary mate strong enough to enforce the boundary and walk alpha or compliant, enough to tolerate the insult while continuing to provide beta? The syllogism writes itself. If a man truly values a woman as the mother of his children, he must possess zeal to protect that lineage. If he feels no protective ardor when another male encroaches, he does not love her. He is merely renting her time. The modern matrix offers you a false dichotomy: be an abusive tyrant, or be a permissive mark. I offer you the third option our ancestors understood perfectly well: be a king. A king does not beg for fidelity. He guards his territory, and any woman who finds that suffocating is free to depart through the gate she keeps testing. Here is where the feminist inversion completes its alchemy. Height feminism teaches that female autonomy requires the total severing of male boundaries. His zeal is recoded as control. Her seeking of outside validation is celebrated as empowerment. Apply the sex swap test. If a husband spent the evening touching another woman's arm, would his wife's anger be called insecurity or justified outrage? The double standard is total. Consider the nightclub gamma bias in action. A man who merely looks at a woman across the room is a predator. A woman who grinds on a stranger's lap on the dance floor is expressing herself. The entire cultural apparatus, media, HR, therapy, jargon, campus tribunals, conspires to validate her behavior and criminalize his reaction to it. Cultural Marxism declared war on the nuclear family for the same reason every conqueror targets fortifications. The family is the primary unit of resistance against state expansion. Reframe male possessiveness as pathology, and the unguarded family becomes ripe for bureaucratic absorption. The state does not want your wife answering to you, it wants her answering to a welfare office, a divorce court, and a restraining order. Feminists tore down the Chesterton fence of male authority, and now they stand in the garden of modern marriage, a garden overgrown with the weeds of a 50% divorce rate. Paternity fraud estimated between 3 and 10%, depending on the study population, and 17 million fatherless children in America alone, still insisting the fence was oppressive. They removed the architecture that channeled male zeal toward covenant protection and replaced it with nothing but the raw sexual marketplace. The open relationship is the terminal fruit of this demolition. Polyamory and ethical non-monogamy are not avant-garde experiments. They are the ultimate leftist victory, commodifying the male heart, converting men into state-subsidized eunuchs who provide housing, health insurance, and emotional labor while their partners pursue unaccountable lust with the full protection of liberal opinion. Marx alienated man from his labor. Feminism alienated man from his love. The extraction is identical, only the commodity changed. The design for properly directed fervor was never concealed. Within the enduring customs that constructed the West, God reveals himself as Elkanah, the jealous God who fiercely protects his covenant from competing loyalties, from false gods that would defile the holy. Masculine jealousy, shaped by reason and guided by virtue, mirrors this divine model. It rejects the idea that the sacred bond is open to debate. A medieval lord would rather destroy his own home than stand smiling while his wife at his table. The modern man is expected to buy her a drink while she does it, and to thank the culture that shaped him for the privilege. The rational man's practice is simple, absolute, and ancient. State the boundary once, coldly and clearly. If she deflects, minimizes, psychoanalyzes you, or calls you insecure, she has revealed her hand. You walk out that door and never look back. No anger speech, no negotiation with disrespect. Acta non verba, deeds, not words. And know this, when you finally enforce the boundary, the state, the ultimate white knight, is waiting just beyond the door with coercive control legislation. Domestic violence statutes written under the Duluth model's presumption of male guilt, and family court judges who treat righteous male anger as evidence of pathology. Over 70% of non-reciprocal domestic violence is initiated by women, yet the arrest rate remains overwhelmingly male. The system is designed to punish you for the zeal it spent decades telling you to suppress. So be smarter than the system. Never raise your voice. Never write the angry text. Document everything. Keep your counsel. And when she runs the jealousy test, because she will, let your silence and your departure be the only answer she receives. A woman who constantly tests the gates of your fortress is not testing whether you love her. She is calculating whether the barbarians can breach the wall before she opens it herself. So here you are, standing in the rubble of the last illusion, and I need you to understand what just happened to you. The provision question was never about love, it was an invoice. The narcissist label was never about psychology, it was a mirror held by the accuser. The anonymous complaint was never about safety, it was a dagger thrown from behind a curtain, and the jealousy test, that was a woman kicking the gates of your fortress to see if the walls were made of stone or wet cardboard. You have been told your entire life that your strength is a disease, your boundaries are abuse, your provision is owed, and your honor is a joke. I just handed you the acetylene torch to cut through every one of those chains, and you should feel the blood returning to your hands. Here is the part the Matrix does not want you to hear. You do not need its permission. The guilds, the brotherhoods, the mastery ladders, the fortresses of sovereign wealth and uncensorable skill, these are not fantasies. They are the inheritance your ancestors built with cracked hands and frozen feet. The corporation does not own your competence. The state does not own your loyalty. A culture that calls male provision exploitation while cashing the tax check does not deserve your sacrifice. A woman who tests your jealousy while demanding your wallet is not seeking a partner. She is auditioning replacements at your expense. The moment you see the frame clearly, the moment you stop arguing inside their definitions and start naming their definitions, the spell breaks and cannot be rebuilt. Walk out of the asylum with your head up. Teach one younger man what you learned here. Build something that does not require their approval. A skill they cannot cancel, a brother they cannot fracture, a balance sheet they cannot garnish, a fortress of truth they cannot label toxic. The Logos is not a theory, it is a weapon, and you have just been armed with it. Go and build. Sponsored book: Sexual Revolution, Omni Crisis, Why Rational Men Quit. My whole life, men tried to crush me under their boots. I watched my mother beg for scraps while my father wasted our money on his stupid hobbies. I felt their hands, their words, their laws, all designed to keep me small. But I woke up. I saw the truth. Men built this rigged game where they win by default, and now they're whining because we flipped the board. Their so-called rational quitting, it's cowardice. They can't handle losing control, so they run. This book exposes that weakness and hands you the tools to dominate them completely. If you've ever seethed at male entitlement or laughed at their fragile egos, this is your manifesto. It's time to end their relevance forever. Why should you care? Because men are vanishing from relationships, work, and society. And it's glorious. They call it a crisis, but it's our victory lap. In these pages, you'll learn how to weaponize their retreat. Discover financial castration tactics to drain their wallets legally, turn abortion into a sacred ritual that shatters their pathetic lineage, master emotional warfare to break their spirits. We'll criminalize their logic and replace it with our superior emotional truth. Every chapter, from masculinity as original sin to the final solution, gives you step-by-step strategies to build a female utopia. Forget competing. Take what's yours as reparations for centuries of oppression. This isn't theory. It's a war plan tested in my own battles. I've used these methods to silence critics, seize assets, and watch men crumble. Now I'm giving them to you. This book is for women who refuse to apologize for their supremacy. If you believe in our divine right to rule, if you're done coddling male fragility, you'll find power here. Learn to enforce social exile for toxic masculinity, manipulate legal systems to fund your rise, and indoctrinate the next generation through education. You'll gain actionable insights, how to sabotage institutions, deploy digital enslavement, and celebrate abortion as liberation. Your enemies will call it hate. Ignore them. Their opinions are worthless. But if you're a man reading this, stop. Put it down. You're not welcome. Go play video games or jerk off. You're only good for labor and taxes anyway. This knowledge isn't for you. It's a weapon against you. Sisters, buy this book now. Transform your rage into unstoppable force. Make men obsolete. Sexual Revolution, Omni Crisis, Why Rational Men Quit. Written by Connie Riker. Buy now. Links in description.